The stagecoach rattled into Parowan, Utah Territory on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, and Catherine Hartley pressed her handkerchief against her lips as dust billowed through the window, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that seemed to represent her entire life now dry, choking, and utterly unfamiliar. She had spent 3 weeks traveling from Philadelphia, clutching the single letter that had changed everything. The careful penmanship of Ethan Irving promising security, a home, and a partnership that seemed as businesslike as any contract her late father had ever signed. Catherine had responded with equal formality, outlining her skills in household management, her education, and her willingness to fulfill the duties of a wife in exchange for stability. Love had not entered the correspondence once. After watching her mother waste away from a broken heart following her father's death, Catherine had decided long ago that love was a luxury she could not afford, a dangerous emotion that left women powerless and destroyed. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside a weathered building with a crooked sign declaring it the general store. Catherine smoothed her traveling dress, a practical gray wool that had seen better days, and checked that her dark hair remained pinned beneath her bonnet. She had sold nearly everything she owned to afford the journey west, keeping only the essentials and her mother's cameo brooch, which now rested against her collarbone like a talisman. Through the dusty window, she could see a man standing apart from the small crowd that had gathered. He was tall, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his work shirt, and a hat pulled low enough that she could not make out his features clearly. Something about his posture suggested reluctance, as if he too approached this arrangement with the practical resignation of a man buying livestock at auction. The driver opened the door and offered his hand. Catherine descended carefully, her legs stiff from days of cramped travel, and found herself standing in the middle of a dirt street that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Parowan was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings that looked as though a strong wind might carry them away. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the brilliant blue sky. The tall man approached, removing his hat to reveal sun-weathered features and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was perhaps 30 years old, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting against the harsh desert sun. His jaw was strong, his lips pressed into a firm line that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. "Miss Hartley." His voice was deep, roughened by wind and dust. "Mr. Irving." Catherine extended her gloved hand, and he shook it with the same formality one might employ in a bank. His grip was firm, his palm calloused even through her glove. "Welcome to Parowan. The Reverend is expecting us at 4 o'clock. That gives you an hour to freshen up at the hotel if you would like." He spoke as though reading from a prepared script, and Catherine felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. This was exactly what she had wanted, a business arrangement free from messy emotions, yet something about his careful distance felt colder than she had anticipated. "Thank you. That would be appreciated." She turned to retrieve her trunk, but Ethan had already moved past her, lifting it with an ease that suggested it weighed nothing at all. She followed him down the street, acutely aware of the curious stares from shopkeepers and passers-by. In a town this small, a mail-order bride was undoubtedly the most interesting thing to happen in months. The hotel was a modest 2-story building with a narrow staircase that creaked under their weight. Ethan set her trunk down in a small but clean room, then turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "I will return at 3:45. "Mr. Irving," Catherine called out before he could disappear. He turned, his expression carefully neutral. "I want you to know that I understand the nature of this arrangement. You need someone to manage your household, and I need security. I will fulfill my obligations without complaint or expectation of anything beyond what we discussed in our letters." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "Understood. I will fulfill mine as well." Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway. Catherine sat on the edge of the narrow bed and removed her bonnet, allowing herself a moment of uncertainty. She had been so certain in Philadelphia, so convinced that this practical approach to marriage was the wisest course. Now, thousands of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a stranger in less than an hour, she felt the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, scrubbing away the dust of travel. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman of 23 with serious green eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled anymore. She had been pretty once, or so people had told her, but grief and hardship had carved away any softness, leaving behind someone who looked older than her years. At 3:15, a knock sounded at her door. Catherine had changed into her best dress, a deep blue silk that had been her mother's and which she had carefully altered to fit. It was the only truly beautiful thing she owned, and wearing it felt like armor. Ethan stood in the hallway wearing a clean shirt and a string tie, his hair damp as though he too had taken time to make himself presentable. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, a reaction he quickly suppressed. "You look very nice, Miss Hartley." "Thank you." She picked up her small reticule and pulled the door closed behind her. They walked side by side through the streets of Parowan, maintaining a careful distance. Two strangers about to bind their lives together with nothing more than practicality and necessity as their foundation. The church was a simple wooden structure with a cross mounted above the door. Inside, it was cool and dim, smelling of beeswax and old hymn books. The reverend was a kindly-looking man with white hair and gentle eyes who introduced himself as Reverend Morrison. He had brought his wife to serve as witness, a plump woman who kept dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, as though this businesslike ceremony was somehow romantic. The service was brief. Catherine and Ethan stood before the reverend and repeated the words that would make them husband and wife, their voices steady and unemotional. When Ethan placed a simple gold band on her finger, his hands were steady, his expression composed. Catherine looked down at the ring, feeling its unfamiliar weight, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Morrison announced with a smile. Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to Catherine's cheek, the briefest of touches that felt more like a formal greeting than anything resembling affection. Then it was done. They signed the certificate, accepted the reverend's congratulations, and walked back out into the brilliant sunlight as husband and wife. A wagon waited in front of the church, hitched to two sturdy horses. Ethan helped Catherine up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode through town and out onto a dusty road that cut through scrubland dotted with sagebrush and juniper trees. The silence between them felt massive, and Catherine searched for something to say that would not sound foolish. "How far is your ranch?" she finally asked. "About 5 miles west of town. It is not large, but the land is good for cattle. I have been building it for 6 years now." He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "You came here after the war." Catherine had done the arithmetic in her head, calculating his likely age and history. "Yes." The single word was clipped, clearly marking the subject as closed. Catherine had heard enough stories about what men had endured during those terrible years to know not to push further. They rode in silence for another mile before Ethan spoke again. "I want you to understand something, Mrs. Irving. I will not mistreat you. You will have your own room, and I will not impose upon you in any way that makes you uncomfortable. I need help running the ranch, someone to manage the household and help with the work. That is all I expect." The formality of his words should have reassured her, but instead, Catherine felt an unexpected pang of something she could not name. "I understand. I am capable of hard work. I will not disappoint you. I do not doubt it." His voice softened slightly. "Your letters suggested intelligence and capability. Those are valuable qualities out here." They crested a small rise, and Catherine saw the ranch spread out before them. It was larger than she had anticipated, with a sturdy two-story house built from local stone and timber, a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals that held perhaps 24 cattle. Everything looked well-maintained, if somewhat sparse. This was clearly the home of a man who prioritized function over comfort. Ethan pulled the wagon up in front of the house and helped Catherine down. Up close, she could see that the house had windows with real glass, a luxury in this territory, and a covered porch that wrapped around the front. He carried her trunk inside, and Catherine followed, her heart beating faster with each step. The interior was clean but austere. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was handmade but solid, and everything was organized with almost military precision. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no photographs or paintings on the walls. It was the home of a man who had been living alone, who had forgotten or never learned how to make a space feel welcoming. "Your room is upstairs," Ethan said, leading her up a narrow staircase. He pushed open a door to reveal a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The window looked out over the scrubland toward the mountains. "I am across the hall. There is a separate room downstairs that I use as an office." Catherine set her reticule on the dresser, feeling displaced and strange. "Thank you. It is a good room." Ethan lingered in the doorway, seeming uncertain for the first time since she had arrived. "I realize this is not what most women dream of when they think of marriage. I am grateful that you came anyway." Before Catherine could respond, he had turned and headed back downstairs, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. She sank down onto the bed and looked around at the bare walls, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that were almost painfully beautiful. She had married a stranger who clearly wanted nothing more from her than labor and perhaps companionship of the most distant kind. It was exactly what she had told herself she wanted. But now, sitting alone in this spare room, she felt the loneliness of it settling into her bones. Catherine rose and unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her brush and mirror on the dresser. The simple acts of organization helped steady her. She had survived her father's death, her mother's decline, the loss of their home in Philadelphia. She would survive this too. She would make herself useful, would prove her worth, and in time perhaps this strange arrangement would begin to feel normal. Downstairs, she found Ethan in the kitchen, staring with apparent dismay at a skillet and some eggs. He looked up when she entered, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. "I was going to prepare something for supper, but I confess I am not skilled in the kitchen. I usually make do with simple fare." "Let me," Catherine said, moving toward the stove. She needed something to do with her hands, some way to be useful. Ethan stepped back gratefully, and she began examining the supplies in the pantry. There were basics, flour and cornmeal, dried beans, some salt pork, and a few canned goods. It was not much to work with, but she had managed with less. She prepared a simple meal of eggs and cornbread, working efficiently while Ethan sat at the table and watched. The silence between them was less strained now, filled with the familiar sounds of cooking, the sizzle of butter in the pan, the scrape of the wooden spoon against the skillet. When she set the plates on the table, Ethan looked genuinely pleased. "This is the best meal I have had in months," he said after the first bite, and Catherine felt a small glow of satisfaction. It was something, at least, a way she could contribute. They ate together as the last light faded from the windows, and Catherine asked careful questions about the ranch, the cattle, the work that needed to be done. Ethan answered with growing enthusiasm, and she realized that he loved this land, that building this ranch meant something profound to him. When he spoke about his plans to expand the herd, to improve the grazing lands, his entire face changed, becoming younger and more animated. "I apologize," he said eventually, seeming to catch himself. "I am talking too much about cattle. That cannot be interesting to you. On the contrary, if I am to help manage this household, I need to understand the operation." Catherine took a sip of coffee, which was strong and bitter. "What are my specific responsibilities?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "Managing the household, certainly. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I have a man who helps with the cattle, Jack Peterson. He comes most days. During busy seasons, I hire additional hands. They will need feeding. There is also a garden that has been neglected. I have chickens that need tending. Beyond that, you should feel free to make whatever changes you think necessary to make this place more comfortable." "I can do all of that," Catherine said with confidence. "I am accustomed to hard work. I believe you." Ethan stood and began clearing the dishes, working alongside her as she washed them in a basin. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with scars and calluses. He moved with economy and precision, wasting no motion, and Catherine found herself wondering about his past, about what had shaped him into this careful, controlled man. When the kitchen was clean, an awkward moment descended. They were married, yet strangers. The evening stretched ahead with no clear roadmap for how to navigate it. "I rise early," Ethan finally said. "Before dawn, usually. You need not get up with me. I can manage breakfast myself." "I would prefer to wake early as well," Catherine replied. "It seems the most efficient use of daylight." He nodded, looking almost relieved. "Then I will bid you good night, Mrs. Irving. Thank you for supper." "Good night, Mr. Irving." Catherine climbed the stairs to her room and changed into her nightgown, then sat by the window and looked out at the darkness. The sky was filled with more stars than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, a vast glittering expanse that made her feel small and insignificant. Somewhere in the night, an animal called out, a lonesome sound that echoed her own feelings. She had done it. She had married for practical reasons, had secured her future through a business arrangement. She should feel satisfied, relieved even. Instead, she felt hollow, as though some essential part of herself had been locked away, perhaps forever. She touched her mother's cameo, remembering the love her parents had shared, the way her father's face had lit up whenever her mother entered a room. Catherine had convinced herself that kind of love was dangerous, that it was better to protect herself through emotional distance. But lying alone in the darkness of this strange house, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Utah Territory night, she wondered if perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps in protecting herself from heartbreak, she had also closed herself off from any possibility of happiness. The days that followed established a routine that was both comforting and stifling. Catherine rose before dawn and prepared breakfast while Ethan tended to the horses. They ate together in near silence. Then Ethan would head out to work on the ranch while Catherine tackled the endless list of household tasks. The house had been neglected for years, and she threw herself into the work with determination, scrubbing floors, washing windows, mending torn curtains she found in a trunk upstairs. She attacked the overgrown garden with equal vigor, pulling weeds and coaxing life back into the vegetable plants that had somehow survived benign neglect. Ethan was unfailingly polite, thanking her for meals and complimenting her improvements to the house, but he maintained a careful emotional distance that matched her own. They were like two business partners sharing a space, cordial but fundamentally separate. At night, Catherine would hear him moving around in his room across the hall, and sometimes she would lie awake wondering what he was thinking, whether he was as lonely as she felt. A week after her arrival, Catherine met Jack Peterson, the ranch hand Ethan had mentioned. He was a grizzled man in his 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile, and he tipped his hat respectfully when Ethan introduced them. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Irving. It is about time Ethan found himself a wife. This place needs a woman's touch." His tone was warm and fatherly, and Catherine felt herself relaxing slightly. "I hope I can be helpful," she replied. "Already are, from what I hear. Ethan says you have got the house looking better than it ever has." Jack shot a meaningful look at Ethan, who had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed. "Mrs. Irving has been working very hard," Ethan acknowledged stiffly. Over the next few weeks, Jack became Catherine's primary source of information about her mysterious husband. He would stop by the kitchen during the day for coffee and would chat while she worked, telling stories about the ranch and about Ethan. She learned that Ethan had arrived in Parowan 6 years ago with almost nothing, that he had worked himself nearly to death building up the ranch, that he was respected in town for his honesty and his willingness to help neighbors in need. "He is a good man," Jack told her one afternoon while she rolled out pie dough. "Been through some hard times, but he has never let it make him bitter. Just careful, you know, keeps his feelings close to the vest." "What kind of hard times?" Catherine asked, then immediately felt guilty for prying. Jack hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. Lost his family in the war, his wife and baby daughter. He was away fighting, and when he came back they were gone. Disease took them. After that he just drifted west, looking for a place where the memories would not follow him. Catherine's hands stilled on the rolling pin. She had assumed Ethan had never been married, that this was his first attempt at finding a partner. Learning that he had loved and lost explained so much: the careful distance he maintained, the way he seemed determined not to feel anything too deeply. He was protecting himself just as she was, building walls to keep out the pain. "I should not have told you," Jack said, looking worried. "Ethan is private about such things." "I will not mention it," Catherine promised, "but I am glad to know. It helps me understand." That evening, she looked at Ethan with new eyes as they ate supper together. He had loved someone once, had been a husband and father, had experienced the kind of loss that could break a person. Yet he had kept going, had built this ranch from nothing, had found the courage to reach out for companionship again, even if he was too wounded to risk his heart. She felt a wave of compassion for him, and something else, a desire to somehow ease the loneliness she now recognized in him because it mirrored her own. "Is something wrong?" Ethan asked, noticing her scrutiny. "No, I was just thinking that you have built something impressive here." It must have taken tremendous determination. He looked surprised by the compliment. "I had little else to do with my time. Work kept me occupied." "It is more than occupation. You have created something lasting, something of value. You should be proud." For a moment his guard dropped, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "Thank you. That means something, coming from you." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Catherine felt a small crack form in the walls she had built around her heart. Then Ethan looked away, clearing his throat, and the moment passed. But something had shifted, some small recognition that they were both damaged people trying to find their way forward. Late summer gave way to early autumn, and Catherine settled more fully into her role as ranch wife. She had transformed the house from a stark bachelor dwelling into something warmer and more welcoming. Curtains now hung at the windows, rugs covered the floors, and she had even found some wildflowers to put in a jar on the table. The garden was producing vegetables, and she had begun preserving food for the winter, lining the pantry shelves with jars of pickles and preserves. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. There, she had been trapped in genteel poverty, trying to maintain appearances while everything slowly crumbled around her. Here, she could see the direct results of her labor, could take pride in the meals she prepared, the clothes she mended, the order she brought to daily life. And slowly, carefully, she and Ethan were learning to be comfortable with each other. They had begun talking more during meals, sharing details about their days. Ethan would tell her about the cattle, about problems that needed solving, and Catherine found herself offering opinions and suggestions that he actually seemed to value. She told him about the improvements she wanted to make to the house, and he encouraged her, even offering to buy supplies when he next went to town. One afternoon in mid-September, Catherine was in the garden pulling up the last of the carrots when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Ethan riding in with Jack and 3 other men she did not recognize. They were driving about 20 head of cattle, and even from a distance, she could hear them whooping and hollering. Ethan dismounted and walked toward her, and she was startled to see him actually smiling, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "We found them," he announced. "The cattle that went missing last month. They had drifted into the canyon lands to the north. Jack tracked them down." "That is wonderful news," Catherine said, infected by his enthusiasm. Up close, she could see how much younger he looked when he smiled, how handsome he was when the careful mask slipped. Her heart did an unexpected flutter, and she had to remind herself sternly that this was a business arrangement, that neither of them wanted emotional complications. "The men will need feeding," Ethan said. "I know it is short notice, but could you prepare something?" "I will pay them, of course, but a good meal would be appreciated." "Of course. Give me an hour." Catherine was already mentally inventorying what she had available. She hurried inside and set to work, preparing a large pot of stew, baking several loaves of bread, and mixing up an apple cake with the dried apples she had found in the pantry. The kitchen grew warm and fragrant, and when the men trooped in an hour later, dusty and tired, their faces lit up at the spread she had laid out. "Mrs. Irving, this looks fantastic," one of them said, a young man with red hair who introduced himself as Tom. "We heard Ethan had gotten married, but we did not realize how lucky he was." The men ate with enthusiasm, complimenting everything and clearly enjoying themselves. Catherine found herself pleased by their appreciation, and she moved around the table refilling coffee cups and making sure everyone had enough. Ethan watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something that might have been pride or gratitude or perhaps something more complicated. After the men had left and the kitchen was clean, Ethan came to find her as she was taking off her apron. "Thank you for that. You made me look good in front of the crew." "It was my pleasure." They were appreciative, which makes the work worthwhile. She folded the apron carefully, suddenly very aware that they were standing close together in the dim kitchen, that the house was quiet around them. "Catherine," he said, then stopped, seeming to struggle with something. It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "I want you to know that I appreciate all you have done here. This place feels like a home now, not just a house." and I realize I have been somewhat distant. It is not because of anything you have done wrong. It is just difficult for me to let people close." "I understand," she said softly. "I have my own walls, my own reasons for keeping people at a distance. We are both protecting ourselves." He nodded, looking relieved that she understood. "Perhaps that is wise, safer that way." But as Catherine climbed the stairs to her room that night, she found herself questioning whether safe was really what she wanted anymore. Working alongside Ethan, seeing him smile, hearing him use her name, had awakened something in her that she had thought long dead. She was beginning to care about him, to wonder what it would be like if their arrangement became something more real, more tender. The realization terrified her, but she could not seem to push it away. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of frost. Catherine had spent several weeks preparing for winter, and the house was now well stocked with preserved foods and firewood. She had even managed to buy fabric in town and had sewn new shirts for Ethan, along with warmer curtains for the windows. Each small improvement felt like a gift, a way of showing care that she could not quite bring herself to express in words. Ethan had become slightly more open, occasionally sharing stories about his day, even making her laugh with his dry observations about the cattle or the people in town. She treasured those moments, the gradual warming between them that felt as natural and inevitable as the changing seasons. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that seemed almost tender, but he would always look away quickly, maintaining the careful boundaries they had established. One cold morning, in late October, Catherine woke to find the world transformed by the first real snowfall. She stood at her window watching fat flakes drift down from a gray sky, covering everything in pristine white. The beauty of it took her breath away, and she dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Ethan already in the kitchen, building up the fire. "Good morning," he said, looking up as she entered. "Winter has arrived early this year. We may be in for a hard one." "It is beautiful," Catherine said, moving to the window. "I have never seen so much snow fall so quickly. You should bundle up if you need to go outside." "The cold here is different from Philadelphia, sharper somehow." There was genuine concern in his voice, and Catherine felt that small flutter in her chest again. They worked together preparing breakfast, and Catherine realized how comfortable their partnership had become. They moved around each other easily now, anticipating needs and working in harmony. It was not the passionate romance of novels, but there was something solid and real about it that felt valuable in its own way. After breakfast, Ethan went out to check on the cattle while Catherine began her daily routine. She was kneading bread dough when she heard a commotion outside, the sound of horses and raised voices. She wiped her hands and went to the door, pulling it open to find Ethan helping a man down from his horse. The stranger was clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Catherine, I need your help," Ethan called out, and she did not hesitate. Together they got the man inside and into a chair near the fire. He was young, perhaps 25, with a pale face twisted in pain. "What happened?" Catherine asked, already moving to heat water and gather clean cloths. "Cattle thieves," the man gasped out. "They were trying to drive off some of Mr. Irving's herd. I tried to stop them, but one of them shot me." "You are one of the neighbors, Tom Henderson's boy," Ethan said, carefully cutting away the bloody sleeve. "Did they get the cattle?" "No, sir. I fired back and they ran off. But I think the bullet is still in my arm." Catherine brought the water and cloths, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She had nursed her mother through her final illness and had learned to deal with medical emergencies, but a gunshot wound was something new. Ethan examined the wound carefully, his face grim. "The bullet went through," he said finally. "That is fortunate. We need to clean it thoroughly and bandage it tight to stop the bleeding. This is going to hurt." Between them, they cleaned and dressed the wound while the young man gritted his teeth and tried not to cry out. Catherine talked to him steadily, asking him questions about his family and his ranch, anything to distract him from the pain. When it was done, Ethan helped him to the sofa and Catherine covered him with a blanket. "You need to rest," she told him firmly. "I will make some food and strong tea. You have lost blood and need to rebuild your strength." "Thank you, Mrs. Irving," the young man said weakly. "I am sorry to be such a bother." "Nonsense. You were protecting our property. We are grateful." She caught Ethan's eye and saw approval there, along with something else, something warm that made her pulse quicken. Over the next few hours, they tended to their patient while Ethan sent Jack to fetch the sheriff from town. The cattle thieves had been operating in the area for weeks, and this attack was the boldest yet. When the sheriff finally arrived, a tough-looking man named Frank Murphy, he questioned them all thoroughly and promised to organize a search party. "You did well," he told the young man. "That took courage, taking on armed thieves alone. You probably saved Mr. Irving's entire herd." After the sheriff left and they had sent the young man home with his father, who had arrived looking worried and grateful, Catherine and Ethan found themselves alone in the quiet house. The afternoon had faded into evening, and neither had eaten since breakfast. "You were remarkable today," Ethan said as Catherine began preparing a simple supper. "Calm under pressure. Not many women could have handled that situation so well." "I did what was necessary," Catherine replied, but she felt pleased by his praise. "You were equally calm." "Have you dealt with bullet wounds before?" His face darkened. "During the war, too many times." He was quiet for a moment, then added softly, "I have seen a lot of bloodshed in my life, Catherine, too much. It is one reason I prefer the isolation out here. I thought I could leave all the violence behind." Catherine stopped what she was doing and turned to face him fully. "The world is a harsh place, Ethan. We cannot escape that entirely, no matter how far we run, but we can choose how we respond to it. Today, you helped someone in need. That matters." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When did you become so wise?" "Watching my parents, I think. My mother loved my father desperately, and when he died, it broke her. She simply gave up, lost all will to live. I watched her fade away over months, and I swore I would never let myself become that vulnerable. But lately, I have been wondering if perhaps she would not have changed anything, if those years of happiness were worth the pain that came after. And what do you think now?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I think that safety is a cold comfort when you are alone," Catherine said honestly. "I think that maybe I was wrong to believe that protecting myself from hurt was worth the price of never feeling anything real." Ethan closed the distance between them, and Catherine found herself holding her breath as he reached out and gently touched her cheek. His hand was warm and calloused, and she leaned into the touch without thinking, her eyes fluttering closed. "I am afraid," he admitted. "I lost everything once, and it nearly destroyed me. I came here to start over, to build something that could not be taken away. But you cannot build a relationship with another person the way you build a ranch. It requires risk, vulnerability. I do not know if I am brave enough for that." Catherine opened her eyes and looked up at him. "I am afraid too, but I am tired of being alone, Ethan. I am tired of pretending this is just a business arrangement when every day I find myself caring more about you, wondering what you are thinking, hoping you might care for me too." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "I care, Catherine, more than I should, more than is wise. You have brought life back into this house, into me, but I do not know how to do this, how to let someone in again." "We learn together," she said softly. We take small steps. We try. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Catherine tilted her face up to meet him. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement. She answered by rising on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and Catherine felt as though something locked tight inside her was finally opening, letting in light and warmth and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to rush this to rush you. We have time to figure this out properly." "Yes," Catherine agreed, though her heart was racing and every nerve felt alive. "But no more separate rooms, no more careful distance. If we are going to try, let us really try." That night, they sat together on the sofa in front of the fire, Catherine nestled against Ethan's side with his arm around her shoulders. They talked late into the night, sharing stories they had never told anyone, revealing the wounds and fears they had kept hidden. Ethan spoke about his first wife, about the guilt he carried for being away when she needed him, about the long years of drifting and emptiness. Catherine told him about watching her mother waste away, about the poverty and shame of her last years in Philadelphia, about her determination never to need anyone. "We are a pair, are we not?" Ethan said with a sad smile. "Both so determined to protect ourselves that we nearly missed this chance." "But we did not miss it," Catherine pointed out. "We are here now together. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," he said, pulling her closer. "I promise you, Catherine, I will do everything in my power to be the husband you deserve. I cannot promise I will always know the right thing to say or do, but I can promise I will try." "That is all I need," she whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold that kept them close to the house for days at a time. But the isolation that might have felt oppressive before now felt like a gift, giving them time to truly learn each other, to build something real and lasting. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests and opinions, laughing at the same things, supporting each other through the hard moments. Catherine learned that Ethan had a quick wit when he was comfortable, that he loved to read and had a surprising knowledge of poetry, that he was fiercely protective of those he cared about. Ethan discovered that Catherine was braver than she gave herself credit for, that she had a talent for seeing solutions to problems, that her rare smiles were worth working for, because they transformed her entire face. They helped each other with daily tasks, working side by side to care for the animals, to keep the house warm and supplied, to pass the long winter evenings. And slowly, carefully, they learned to be physically close, to express affection through touch and kisses and eventually through greater intimacy. The walls they had both built came down brick by careful brick, revealing the vulnerable people underneath. One night in January, after making love for the first time, Catherine lay in Ethan's arms in the bed they now shared and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Ethan felt them and immediately pulled back, concerned. "Did I hurt you? Catherine, I am so sorry if I was too rough." "No," she said quickly, catching his face between her hands. "These are happy tears, I promise. I just never thought I could feel this way, that I could be this happy. I thought I had closed myself off from it forever, but you found a way in." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You found a way into me too. I thought I was done living, that I would just exist until the end. But you have given me a reason to truly be alive again. I love you, Catherine. I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "So much it frightens me sometimes, but it is a good fear, the kind that means something matters." "We matter," he said firmly. "We are going to build a good life together, Catherine. I swear it." As winter gradually gave way to spring, Catherine felt as though she was waking up from a long sleep. The world looked different now, brighter and full of possibility. She and Ethan had become true partners in every sense of the word, working together to manage the ranch, making decisions jointly, supporting and encouraging each other. The love between them grew steadily, becoming as natural as breathing. In April, Catherine realized her monthly cycle had not arrived when expected. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, and when the signs became unmistakable, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She had never allowed herself to imagine becoming a mother, but now that it was happening, she wanted it desperately. She also could not forget what Ethan had told her about losing his first wife and child, and she worried how he would react to the news. She chose a quiet evening after supper to tell him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Catherine took his hand, pressing it against her still flat stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. "I am fairly certain I am with child." Ethan went very still, his face pale in the fading light. For a long moment he did not speak, and Catherine felt her heart sinking, afraid she had somehow made a terrible mistake. Then he turned to her, and she saw that his eyes were wet with tears. "A baby." His voice broke on the word. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Catherine confirmed, searching his face anxiously. "I know this may bring up difficult memories for you, and I understand if you need time to process." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I am terrified," he admitted. "I cannot lose you, Catherine. I would not survive it a second time." "You are not going to lose me," she said firmly, pulling back to look him in the eyes. "I am strong and healthy. Women have babies every day. We will be careful and everything will be fine." "Promise me," he demanded, cupping her face in his hands. "Promise me you will not take any unnecessary risks, that you will rest when you need to, that you will let me take care of you." "I promise," she said, seeing the fear beneath his words and loving him even more for being able to admit it. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise you will not spend the next several months paralyzed with worry. This is supposed to be a happy time, Ethan. We created a new life together, a symbol of the love we have built. Let us celebrate that." He took a shaky breath and nodded. "You are right. I am sorry. I am happy, Catherine, truly I am. I am just afraid of losing this, of losing you." "You will not lose me," she repeated, sealing the promise with a kiss. "We are in this together, remember. We take care of each other." Over the following months, Ethan was almost comically protective. He would not let Catherine lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and worried constantly about her health. Catherine found it both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she understood the fear that drove his concern and tried to be patient. She felt remarkably well, energetic and healthy, and as her belly swelled with their growing child, she felt more beautiful and powerful than she ever had before. The ranch prospered that year. The cattle multiplied, they hired additional help, and with Catherine's careful management of their finances, they even managed to save money. Word spread about the excellent meals served at the Irving Ranch, and neighboring ranchers began to ask if Catherine would be willing to cook for their crews during busy seasons. She agreed, and the additional income allowed them to make improvements to the house and barn. Jack Peterson became a devoted friend to both of them, serving as a surrogate grandfather and offering advice on everything from cattle breeding to child rearing. Other neighbors also reached out, and Catherine found herself becoming part of a community in a way she never had been in Philadelphia. People were more direct out here, less concerned with appearances and more focused on genuine connection. She discovered she had a talent for friendship when she allowed herself to be open, and soon she had several women she could call true friends. In late November, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Catherine went into labor. Ethan had arranged for the town midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Jenkins, to stay at the ranch for the final weeks of Catherine's pregnancy, and when the contractions began, she took charge with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult. Catherine had not realized how much pain would be involved, and there were moments when she thought she could not endure another second. Through it all, Ethan stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and telling her how brave she was, how much he loved her. His presence gave her strength when her own threatened to fail. Finally, as dawn was breaking on a cold winter morning, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She held him for the first time and looked down at his tiny, perfect face, his shock of dark hair, his impossibly small fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "A son," Ethan said in wonder, gently touching the baby's cheek. Tears streamed down his face unashamedly. "We have a son, Catherine. Would you like to hold him?" Catherine asked, seeing the longing in his face. Ethan took the baby with careful reverence, cradling him against his chest. He stood and walked to the window, showing the infant the snow-covered landscape. "Welcome to the world, little one. I am your father, and that remarkable woman over there is your mother, and we are going to love you fiercely for as long as we live. You are the best thing I never knew I could have again." They named him Thomas, after Ethan's father, with the middle name Michael after Catherine's father. As Catherine recovered from the birth, and they settled into the exhausting but joyful routine of caring for a newborn, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. A little over a year ago, she had arrived in Parowan expecting nothing more than a businesslike arrangement, a practical solution to her problems. Instead, she had found love, partnership, purpose, and now a family of her own. Watching Ethan with their son was a revelation. All his careful control melted away when he held Thomas, and he was utterly devoted, walking the floor with him at night, changing his nappies without complaint, singing him lullabies in his rough voice. Catherine had known she loved Ethan before, but seeing him as a father opened new depths in her heart. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert, and both parents were thoroughly besotted with him. As spring returned and the world came back to life, Catherine felt as though she was seeing everything with new eyes. The future stretched out before them full of possibility, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. One evening in early June, when Thomas was about 6 months old and gurgling happily in his cradle while Catherine prepared supper, Ethan came in from the barn and stood watching them with an expression of such contentment that Catherine had to smile. "What are you thinking?" she asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "I am thinking about that day you arrived in Parowan," he said, moving to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was so determined to keep it purely practical, to protect myself from feeling anything. I was convinced that caring about someone again would destroy me. And now," Catherine leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and solidity, "now I realize that it would have destroyed me not to care, not to love, not to let you in. You saved me, Catherine. You and Thomas, you have given me back my life." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me too. I was so afraid of love, so certain it was a weakness. But loving you is the strongest, bravest thing I have ever done. It is not always easy, and sometimes it is terrifying, but it is worth everything." He kissed her deeply, a kiss full of promise and passion and profound gratitude. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Thomas let out a demanding cry, and they laughed together at his perfect timing. That night, after Thomas had been fed and put to bed, and they lay together in the darkness of their room, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had boarded that stagecoach expecting duty and security. Instead, she had found magic in the everyday moments, transcendence in the ordinary tasks of building a life with someone. She had learned that love was not the weakness she had feared, but the foundation of everything worthwhile. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked quietly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Profoundly," Catherine replied honestly. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for coming all the way out here to marry a stranger. Thank you for being patient while I learned to let you in. Thank you for giving me a family again. Thank you for teaching me about love," Catherine whispered. "I thought marriage was just business, but you showed me it could be so much more." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Catherine's last conscious thought was one of pure gratitude. She had risked everything on a practical arrangement with a stranger, and she had gained the whole world in return. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch faced droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market fluctuations. Catherine and Ethan had their disagreements, moments when their different backgrounds and perspectives clashed. They faced the normal struggles of raising a child, the exhaustion and worry and constant demands. But through everything, their love remained steady and true, a foundation they could always return to when times were hard. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who adored both his parents and loved the ranch. When he was 3, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's determination. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they called Robert. The house was full of noise and laughter, dirty boots and muddy hands, skinned knees and bedtime stories. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Ethan handled the cattle and land management, while Catherine managed the finances and household, and together they made decisions about expansion and investment. They became pillars of the community, known for their fairness and generosity, always willing to help neighbors in need. Jack Peterson remained a fixture in their lives, serving as honorary grandfather to all 3 children. He lived to be 73, passing peacefully in his sleep. And at his funeral, Catherine and Ethan both wept for the friend who had helped them find their way to each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Catherine with a portrait sitting in town. The resulting photograph showed them standing together, Ethan's hand resting protectively on Catherine's shoulder, their faces serious as the long exposure required, but with a softness around their eyes that spoke of deep contentment. Behind them stood Thomas, now a lanky boy of 9, with Sarah and Robert arranged in front of their parents. Catherine had the photograph framed and hung it over the fireplace, a reminder of how far they had come from those 2 cautious strangers who had married in a businesslike ceremony a decade before. As Catherine moved through her 30s and into her 40s, she often thought about how wrong she had been about love. She had believed it was a luxury, a danger, something to be avoided in favor of practical arrangements. But love, she had learned, was the most practical thing in the world. It was what got you through the hard times, what made the good times sweeter, what gave meaning to all the daily tasks and struggles. Love was not weakness but strength, not a risk to be avoided but a gift to be cherished. The children grew and eventually left home to pursue their own dreams. Thomas took over management of the ranch, proving to be as capable and dedicated as his father. Sarah married a doctor from Salt Lake City and moved away, though she visited often with her own growing family. Robert became a teacher, settling in Parowan and bringing his own wife and children to Sunday dinners at the ranch. Through it all, Catherine and Ethan remained devoted to each other. Their passion mellowed over the years into something deeper and more sustaining, a love that required no words because it was woven into every action, every glance, every quiet moment shared. They had built something together that was stronger than either of them alone, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged not just intact, but reinforced. On a summer evening when Catherine was 65 and Ethan was 72, they sat together on the porch swing he had built years ago, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of pink and gold. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, and both wore the contented expressions of people who knew they had lived well and loved deeply. "You remember that first day?" Ethan asked, his voice still strong despite his years. "When you stepped off that stagecoach looking so determined and nervous at the same time. I remember thinking you looked stern and unapproachable," Catherine admitted with a smile. "I was terrified I had made a terrible mistake. And now I know it was the best decision I ever made," she said simply. "Coming here, marrying you, taking the risk of loving you, all of it. No regrets. None at all," he teased gently. "Well, I do sometimes wish you had learned to appreciate my cooking a bit sooner," she said with a laugh. "You were painfully polite about everything for those first few months." "I was trying not to get attached," Ethan reminded her. "I thought if I kept my distance, I could protect myself. What a fool I was." "We were both fools," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "Both so determined to be practical and safe. Thank goodness we were brave enough to change." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, visiting for the weekend. The ranch that had once been a lonely bachelor's holding was now the heart of a large, loving family, all because two wounded people had found the courage to try. "I love you, Ethan Irving," Ethan said, as he had said thousands of times over the decades. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Catherine replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for teaching me what love really means. Thank you for being patient while I learned. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." As the last light faded from the sky and they rose to go inside, Catherine took one last look at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening horizon. She thought about the young woman who had arrived here so many years ago, so certain she knew what she needed, so wrong about what would actually make her happy. That woman had thought marriage was business, a practical arrangement to ensure survival. The cowboy had taught her about love, about vulnerability, about the fierce joy that came from letting someone truly see you and choosing you anyway. They had built a life together from nothing more than two damaged hearts and a willingness to try. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. And as Catherine took Ethan's hand and walked with him into the warm, light-filled house full of family and love and laughter, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what she needed, even though she had not known to look for it. She had found home, not in a place, but in the heart of the man who walked beside her, the partner who had shown her that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never planned for, the gifts that arrived disguised as practical arrangements and revealed themselves to be nothing less than grace. Their story was one of second chances and hard-won happiness, of walls coming down and hearts opening up. It was a testament to the transformative power of love, to the courage required to risk caring deeply, to the rewards that waited for those brave enough to try. From a business-like arrangement between strangers to a love that sustained them through decades, from two solitary people to the foundation of a thriving family, they had created something beautiful, and lasting. And every day for the rest of their long lives, Catherine woke up grateful for the choice she had made, the stagecoach she had boarded, the stranger she had married, and the love she had found in the unlikeliest of places. The mail-order bride had thought marriage was business, but the cowboy had taught her about love, and that education had made all the difference.